Welcome, Martha. Thank you so much for being here and for being in New York, agreeing to a Q&A about your film, Three Red Sweaters. It's a lovely film. So first of all, can you just give me a bit of background? I think you made Three Red Sweaters after you left Vermont on an MBA, I think it was, in film. But
yeah.
You've been doing lots of editing since then. So just fill me in on your background a little bit.
Sure. I had been working in New York as an assistant editor and as a freelancer for a few years, and I felt like I kind of stagnated in my own sort of artistic process. And so I started to pursue a low residency Master's of Fine Arts at Vermont College of Fine Arts in Montpelier. And they have a really interesting model because they don't require full-time residency at the college. Students kind of come from all over, and the faculty come from all over. So they're able to kind of draw a lot of really interesting independent filmmakers to be their faculty. So I got to work with some really great artists like Josephine Decker and Malik Batal and Jeremiah Zagar and Laura Colella and some really cool, exciting filmmakers. Terrence Nance was another. And yeah, so that was a super exciting time. And that was sort of where I started and worked on the bulk of this project, and then started to take it to festivals after I graduated in 2016. And since then, I've been working in Brooklyn as a freelancer, but also actually more recently, I started teaching film. I spent like 3 years teaching post-production and some film classes back at Kenyon College in Ohio, sort of spending my summers back in New York. And now I've relocated back to Brooklyn, and I'm just about to start teaching an editing class at Fashion Institute of Technology remotely. This will be my first Zoom course that I've taught, so it's a whole new world. And I'm also working on some other documentary projects.
Yeah, you're a very busy girl. I think it's great. But just tell me, so I'd just like to know how the film came about in your mind. You know, you say as you explain, you say a short documentary about how our memories are changing now that we can document every moment of our lives. But it's much more complicated than that, isn't it? This film exists on several levels. So just tell me about how it developed and why you chose it.
Sure. So I'd been thinking a lot, I think at the time, about memory. Memory has always been something that I have enjoyed thinking about and working with in my own visual process, exploring memory in film. Always liked films about memory and books about memory. And I think that was sort of where that was like my point of departure for the film. And then I kind of started to realize, well, we are constantly trying to remember things because we take photos of them all the time. I think I was also reading Sally Mann's book, Hold Still, and she talks a lot about the power of images to help you remember, but also to help you forget, that also like make you forget. She talks about remembering, or how photos from her childhood, she actually doesn't remember those as well, those moments that she has photos of, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And that got me thinking about the way that we interact with our phones, how we have cameras with us now all the time. You really don't have to be judicious. Like the average person doesn't have to be judicious about the type of photo they take in a particular moment, because they can just take so many and it doesn't matter. There's no economy. You don't need, you're not paying for the film, so you don't need to be like strict in how or you don't really need to put that much thought into how you compose necessarily. And then I sort of started thinking about how what happens when you have taken thousands of photos, millions of photos maybe throughout your life, and you just have them all in iPhoto, like in your photo library, stored on hard drives. Like, what does that really mean? They're not tactile. You can't interact with them unless you have a screen in front of you. And then I just sort of looked around me and realized, like, my grandfather was kind of an interesting place to start talking about this, because he was someone who always took photos. And 16 millimeter film throughout his life. And so I sort of started asking him questions. I actually interviewed a bunch of people about this as I was starting research. And eventually I realized that he was my most compelling subject.
Absolutely. And what a rich archive of material. He certainly knew how to shoot on 16 mil as well. Just extraordinary. Okay, so what fascinates me is that the film exists on several levels. So it's a very intimate film about your relationship with your grandfather to a degree. And I think your grandmother, is she the female voice?
My mother, actually.
Mother is, I thought it might be, that's right. Okay. So on one level, it's an intimate portrait of your relationship with your family. But on another, it's talking about exactly what you've been mentioning, a much larger issue of how we document what we keep and how our documenting is affected by modern technology.
Yeah.
What did you want the audience to come away from with the film?
I love that you've asked that question, because that's a question I really like to ask myself when I'm working on a project, and also I pose that to my students. What do you want the audience to feel when the screen goes black at the end of your film? And I think I really wanted my audience to have a moment of reflection on their own style of like preservation and memory collection, and consider how do we use photographs to like relate to the people we love? Are we constantly trying to preserve them? There's also the sort of social media narcissism aspect. Like, are we just trying to show other people the good parts of our lives? Like, we are constantly editing. Instagram doesn't ever show like the bad. Well, actually now it does, given the sort of change, the massive cultural shift that's happened in the last few months, especially in the United States. But generally, social media posts are about like what's good in your life. You're not really showing like the death of a family member necessarily, or you're certainly not showing like that act. Like, you're not showing that moment. You might memorialize them, but you're not like showing your bad days. You're not showing like when you spill your coffee all over the subway. You're not like taking a photo of that necessarily. And like,
no, it's true. And it can be fake news, can't it, in a way? You're showing
totally
the world.
Exactly. So that was also something I was thinking about too. Like, I think I really wanted the audience to sort of have a moment of self-reflection and think about the way that they interact with their phone and how they use their phone camera to interact with the world.
I see. Very good. I think that's really I think it's such a fascinating question of the value of the image and how we use it and collect it. And as I said, you're incredibly lucky in that your grandpa had a huge collection of material, very nicely shot.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about the structure of the film, how you came to structure. So you had all this material and you decided to focus on your grandpa in order to discuss these at least two layers of information. I thought the film opened beautifully. It was, well, first of all, I think the title is wonderful because it's very enigmatic and mysterious. And you see what happens, that's right. But then I thought the first sequence with catching the birds and his voice is really wonderful. And then the shot of you, I think you, and then the title. And then,
actually, it's my mom, shot of my mom.
All right, okay.
Yeah, she's the little girl in all the footage.
Oh, that's right. I see. So that explains a lot. But then the title comes, and then in the next couple of images, because of the voiceover, because of the phone call, you realize that your grandfather is losing his mind, which of course I think has dementia. And so that gives a poignancy to the material that he shot and how he now relates to it. Was all the material silent?
Yes. Yeah, there was no sound.
Right. And so how did you go about constructing the sound with the phone conversations? Was all the material in the film his archive?
Yes. Yeah, he
No
shot.
shooting at all.
It was all him.
That's amazing.
Or someone, as he says in the footage at one point, or as he says in the interview at one point, anybody who could hold a camera. But he was always present. It was always his sort of, he was the architect. And
I thought it was really extraordinary to actually see him slightly out of focus at the end. I thought that was really amazing. So we go on this journey. So how did you construct the soundtrack first and then find the images to work against or counterpoint or support what the sound was saying? Did you build a script?
I did kind of, actually. So the interview took place, basically it was many interviews. I would sort of call him every week as I was as I was sort of starting to work with the footage, and I would record our phone conversations. He was in California and I was in New York. I did talk to him and record him in person a couple of times. And I just sort of like asked him a lot about the footage, and I'd kind of call him once a week and we would have a conversation and chat about the footage and chat about whatever else. And he was actually pretty sharp up until the end, but you're right. His health was failing. And so the summer that I was really working on this, every time I called him, he would sound just like a little bit weaker or like a little bit worse. And then you hear me have a conversation with my mom where she's like, yeah, you should come back soon because he probably doesn't have that much longer. So I became more and more aware as I got deeper into the project that he was actually not going to survive probably to see the end of the project, which was kind of a big moment for me personally when I was working on it. And that kind of also changed the urgency with which I was kind of approaching the project as well.
Why did you not use any of the interviews that you shot?
I actually didn't shoot any interviews. I shot one iPhone video actually of him watching an early cut of the film, but he was very weak at that point and he actually fell asleep. So I didn't take that personally, but it just didn't, in the end, it didn't seem to fit. I did have an early cut of the film where I had mixed in a bunch of my own footage that I had shot of other stuff. And then at a certain point, I'd shown it to some people and the overwhelming feedback was like, no, you should get rid of your own stuff. Like his footage is what's like the most, you should just center everything around his footage. And that actually tells a stronger visual story. And it was much more in line with the overall themes of the film I was trying to convey. So that just ended up making a lot more sense. But I constructed the interview basically from all of our conversations and kind of just wove different pieces around the sort of main points that I found the most interesting and that I really wanted to kind of hit about memory and about preservation and about his experience growing up and like in his middle age filming everything and taking lots of photos, and then up to now, how did he sort of feel culture had shifted and changed around photography and like family documentation.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about that in a while, but also his relationship gave the footage a different significance. Because, he said, first of all, I filmed, I think he says in the film, I filmed what I liked, and I filmed people at work, and then I think he threw them away. There's a lovely of a rhinoceros or a hippopotamus, I can't remember. But then he says, and I think they're valuable because I can revisit them and their memories. But then, of course, that changes the nature of the footage if he isn't there.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about that? Have you taken on the...
So this isn't really in the film, but he took a massive amount of photographs and would put them in these picture books. Mm-hmm. And so we have picture books that are just like meticulously, I have memories of him sitting at the dining room table in my grandparents' house with like a paper cutter, like cutting off like resizing all of the photos and like what massive like amounts of double stick tape. And I very much remember the like tactile experience of him like working on these books. as a child. I remember just like, you know, going and sitting with him while he was doing this, and also like adapting the process myself as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And that was maybe some of the first editing I did, maybe like as a little kid. And yeah, I think that I as a result, my family really values having these sort of tomes of memory lying around, and we've always revisited them. And when I was younger and my grandparents were alive, we would pull out these volumes and look at them together. And it was a sort of family, we would relive these things together as a family and learn about people and friends of my grandparents who were in the photo. I mean, it was just like an interesting way to bond. Like it was kind of a way, an event of like family bonding in some ways. And
do you think that that's very unlikely to happen with someone who films with an iPhone? Lots and lots of images.
That's such a good question. And I think that is definitely one of the things I'm like wondering about with the film. I don't know. I don't think that it's as like people crowding around a computer to like go through an iPhone like album or iPhoto album just seems kind of less likely. Like I haven't ever done that. I've watched photo slideshows at like friends' weddings and anniversary parties and stuff. Like I think that is like a good thing, but that's also not new. People have always had slideshows, whether it was like a physical slide rack.
But do you think are you implicitly saying that the value of the decision to make the image is degraded if with an iPhone you're filming yourself and everything else around you all the time? Is that somewhere in your...
I think for personal memories, I think separate from like news and current events and like filming things to capture information, separate from that, I do think that having such power to take images of anything you want, whether it's what you're having for dinner or like the cute dog you're passing on the street, I think that the influx of images does degrade the overall value of them. That's
because you make that a question in the film, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You say, does it mean because we film everything we won't have to remember? And is this really, is this true or is this not true?
Yeah, I think I really have come to believe that I really believe that it is true that, you know, we do take photos almost as a way to release ourselves from having to remember something. There's sort of a security, you wrap yourself up in this sense of security that you've got the image in your pocket, so you don't have to interact with this image anymore.
Very interesting. I think it's quite fascinating. But he filmed everybody all the time, and I think your mum said he was very pervasive, but not like people with iPhones. Now, that's interesting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he was more discreet or more discerning about what he filmed and decided, or instead of everybody film? What do you think that is about?
I think that's a great question. I think it was like, in some ways it was more of an event that he would get out the 16 millimeter camera, because that was a little bit different than his picture camera, which and he had largely, when I was a child, he had largely stopped filming 16 millimeter. He didn't really do that as much when I was a kid. I just remember him with his picture camera, with his various picture cameras and lenses, and he would always have those. You just always have those, and that was just like a given at any family, anything. Granddad would have his camera. But I guess I never really minded it. I think the filming was sort of, when my mom was a child, was more of an event and was sometimes a little bit like pervasive. And I think one of the things I sort of try to explore doing with the footage is I tried to find a couple of moments where he's really apart. He's really like removed from what he's filming. There's that shot of everybody kind of running away from him down the beach. And I think that that is sort of a moment I found where he's like really letting them like leave him behind, because he wants to be in the film. He wants to be the sort of the documenter of that moment. He doesn't want to be in that moment. And that's another thing I'm kind of trying to explore with the film is, when you are documenting something, how removed from that thing are you? Some people use it as a way to interact with things, but I think inherently it puts a wall between you and whatever moment you're capturing. And if you're consistently just taking photos of sunsets, are you really looking at the sunset? Because you're looking at it through a screen. Like, you're looking at it through a lens. You're not looking at it just like...
You're not experiencing it in the same way, are you?
Yeah. There's a barrier.
I think we could talk a lot more, but we don't have time.
No, that's okay.
I mean, do you think, if you had to sort of project, what do you think is the future of your grandfather's obvious value in his home images and movies? How do you think, what will it be like? What will they be like to have that same value in the future?
Do you mean, what do I think people will generally do? That's a great question. I think that you can see a move towards, like, definitely I have friends who love to use their film cameras and who seek out, who buy film and try to like make that a part of their practice. There is a move towards like that vintage. People are always searching, and even the Instagram filters, there are all these like vintage looks because people like that film quality. We're really drawn to that like nostalgia. Our culture, America especially, and maybe I can broadly say Western culture, but we love nostalgia. We love to be nostalgic. And especially during times of COVID. In fact, I read a New York Times article recently that talks about how like we're pushed right now even into more nostalgia, because nostalgia is like a place of comfort. So when we feel uncomfortable, we kind of gravitate back in time to like happier moments. So I do think, I hope that sort of like us skewing towards nostalgia will help us value individual images and be careful in the way that we take and curate them. I don't know. I mean, as the cameras get better and better, phone cameras get better and better, the quality of images will continue to improve. But as we've already seen with film, with the development and ubiquity of film technology, beautiful images, if they're, don't necessarily mean good art. Like, they don't necessarily mean that the film is going to be successful. So I don't know. I don't know if I can truly answer that question. I think kind of both, that hopefully people will value their images more and be more conscientious in the way that they take them, because they don't want to just have a bazillion, they don't want to get to the end of their lives and have a bazillion photos on their computer that they'll never look at again. But I also don't think that humans are going to stop feeling, I think there's so much comfort in just taking photos on your phone.
Very good. I've got to stop. But I haven't asked the major question. You're working on another film that you're directing, Defying Silence. What's that about?
Defying Silence, I'm co-directing it with a woman named Bernita Llanos, and she's Chilean, and we shot a film we started in August of last year and then returned to Santiago, Chile in November, and it's about this sort of new surge, this sort of second wave of Chilean feminism.
Great. Well, Martha, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
That's just grand.
Really a pleasure.